This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
If you have adopted, if you are adopted, if you've dealt with foster care, we're going to talk a little bit about that. I was sharing with my next guest a little bit about the fact that my own son has fostered a child. You're going to love the story you're about to hear. This particular man has fostered 54 different children. It sounds like a movie. It really does. And what is foster care, right? Let's talk a little bit about it. It's designed, if you're not familiar with what it is, for temporary care of children who can't stay in the safety of their own homes due to neglect or family challenges or abuse, something along those lines, drug addiction, whatever it might be. And the goal ultimately is the unification of that child, of that family. They want the family to stay intact. Sometimes it's not possible, and sometimes those children may need to be adopted. And I know there's a lot of foster parents that sometimes hope for that. I have a colleague that I work with here, and he told me that his sister was a foster parent, and she had a child for about 3 or 4 years, and they were so in love with this baby, and they just wanted to adopt it so bad. But ultimately, the mother was able to return to the role of being a mother, and it was put back into her care. So it can be challenging, but it's a beautiful ministry. It really is. And these children need loving homes. They need a place where they can feel safe, where they can be fed and clothed. And foster families don't just provide really a shelter, but they provide kids, I think, so much more. They provide them love is really what happens. Right now, there are over 400,000 children in the U.S. In the foster care system. Nearly 120,000 of them are waiting to be adopted. And that that's like filling a small city with children who need homes, if you think about it. I was thinking about this, and I'll talk to my next guest about it if they can address it. Maybe you've been through this. There are challenges today to foster care. And we live in a time where, for example, the Catholic Foster Care Agency in Philadelphia, they're facing lawsuits and threats and possibly even closure simply because they want to place children in homes with people who may object to this transgender agenda, to some of these gender and sexuality issues that conflict with their faith. So if you're a foster parent today, you might be required, if you're going to foster, to say, okay, I'm going to support that child's choice to transition. And not every child you get's right out of the womb. Sometimes they're 10, sometimes they're 15. I mean, it can be whatever age. And if that goes against your beliefs, what do you do as a foster parent or as somebody who wants to provide that love that I spoke about, that care, that charity to that child that needs it? And yet now you've got the state telling you, So as Catholics, we're called to love. We are called to care for each other unconditionally. But that's where the intersection comes, right, between your faith and what is moral and what is right. Let's talk about it today. I've got the great privilege of having in studio today with me Brian Vogrinc. When you talk about fostering, he took it to a heroic level. He and his late wife, I believe, fostered 54 children, is what he was telling me. And it's a lot of work, but he's got an amazing story to share. We want to hear about it today, and it's great to have you in studio with me, Brian. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Drew. It's an honor.
It's great to talk with you. When I heard your story, Nick was telling me, my producer Nick was sharing about it. I said, we got to get him in studio. It's going to be a great, great story. I know you lost your wife.
Yes.
And I'm sorry to hear
Thank
that.
you.
I met your beautiful new wife,
Yes.
and she's got a great story. We can't talk to her about it, but we'll get her back on the air someday here. But we've got a breakdown in family in our culture today. We've got an epidemic of drugs. We've got all sorts of other issues. I pointed out there's hundreds of thousands of kids right now in the foster care system. Maybe give us a perspective on how big the number actually is, what foster care is all about, and then take us through your story. Tell me how you got involved.
Well, right now, I think they say in the state of Illinois, there's 20,000 children in foster care. I think it's higher than that.
That's just one state.
Yeah, and it was higher a number of years ago when my wife and I were very active in it. I thought the number was closer to 30,000 in the state of Illinois. So I was kind of surprised when I saw those numbers. 20% of those children try to unify them back with their parents every year. Another 21% are given guardianship with someone else in the family to take over there as a guardian. But every year that number just comes back. So you have 4,000 kids this year that are reunified with their parents, but you have 4,000 that go back into the system next year. So there's a crazy breakdown in the family. And other than God, I don't know how else to fix it.
So tell me your story. How did you get involved in this? I mean, what made you want to foster? Was it a fertility issue, I'm assuming?
No.
Or was it just out of your heart? Because I know a lot of people who can have children.
Right.
Say, I'm going to foster, and maybe by God's grace, I'll be able to have that child. But, you also have to deal. Sometimes children who are fostered have particular handicaps, or they've come from parents who've had some sort of drug addiction, and they may deal with those issues as well. But you come from abuseful relationships, and they're dealing with trauma. It's a beautiful calling. So yours was not fertility. What made you decide to foster?
So my wife and I were pretty young. My wife was 22. I was 24 when we got married. When she was 16 years old, she found an abandoned baby. She worked at a pharmacy. And there was a baby abandoned in the car that she ran across during that time. When she went to the police came to the pharmacy, and she said, "What's going to happen to the baby?" And they said, "It's going to go into foster care." And she didn't know what that was. She always said God was planting a seed in her for the future. Wow. And when I was in college, I was a big brother. And so I worked with a young boy when I was in college. And that motivated both of those events. We got married. Then I was 24, she was 22. We felt a need to get involved with foster care. A month after we got married, my wife got pregnant. 9 months later, my oldest son was born. But we were maybe 2 years into our marriage, and we felt a need to get more involved, to help out someone. We were pro-life. And we thought, okay, we need to somehow put it into action. Yeah. And so we decided we looked into me being a big brother. And I thought, the problem with that was that it was a great organization at the time, but it required me on Saturdays, or when I took another little boy out, that I'd have to leave my son at home and just spend time with him. And I thought there's got to be some way that we can within the family. So we checked it out and found out foster care. We looked at Catholic Charities. We ended up going with DCFS. And I think the reason back then was that we thought, well, it was just another step to go through Catholic Charities. And so our first child came on Good Friday, and our first foster child came in the afternoon, and they said, "Hey, we have this little boy." And
how old was he?
He was 3 months old.
Oh, wow.
He was in the hospital. He was failing to thrive, and he had lost his sucking device, and so he couldn't suck. And so they said somebody needs to hold him. Somebody needs to feed them. And so when we got him, so we went to pick him up. It was 3:00 in the afternoon
Our mercy
on Good Friday.
That's a powerhouse hour.
That was a cool thing. Yes, and we picked him up. Now he was a little black baby, and we brought him home. And he was failing to thrive. And so what we had to do was feed him every 2 hours. And so we took shifts. I was working full time. We had a 2-year-old son, a 1.5-year-old son. We would take shifts, and she would, for example, like at night, I would take 10 o'clock. We'd have every 2 hours. She would take 12. I would take 2. She would take 4. I would take 6. I would go off to work, and then she would handle it the rest of the day. Wow. And that's how we fed him. And I remember the first night we had him. We had do you remember those Papasan chairs?
Oh, sure.
Okay. So I'm sitting in the Papasan chair, and it's midnight or 2:00 in the morning. And I have this little bitty baby, and I'm thinking, it just tore me apart because unfortunately his mother, he was a drug withdrawal baby. His mother had lots of issues, drug issues. There was no one else in the family. There wasn't a father in the family. The grandmother wasn't involved, so there was no family. And I sat there and I cried, and I thought, he has no family that wants him. Oh. The state doesn't want him. Nobody wants this little baby. And so we had him for 18 months. And after about 18 months, we decided, he went up for adoption, and we wanted to adopt him. But at that time, because we were a white family and he was black, there was some hesitancy for us to adopt him. And
has that changed today?
I think it has. I think it's gotten better. Yes, I think it has changed. I think it has. But at that time, that was something. And their reasoning was that from a cultural standpoint, just from everything, it's going to be difficult. And I do remember times when he was 4 years old, he would sit in front of the TV set and and rub his arm to try to rub the black off. Because and so there are things like that you have to deal with. We ended up at 18 months. They called us up and said, "When it's up for adoption, but we're not going to let you adopt him." And we were kind of like, "Why?" And they said, "Well, we need to find a family where he'll fit into a little bit more culturally."
Culturally, yeah.
And so my wife and I prayed about it, and we said, "Okay, Lord, if this is what you want, this isn't what we want." We were devastated. My wife was mad.
I can only imagine.
She was mad.
I would be too.
She was Italian descent, Italian Irish, and she was mad. Yep. So we just talked about it and said, we've just got to trust God. We've got to say, if God wants this, we have to trust him. So we had some families that came by. There was one that was going to adopt him. And at the last minute, they said, "We just don't think he'll fit into our family." So we had a friend that was an attorney in the Rockford area where we lived, and he got involved with DCFS. He called us back up and said, "It's going to happen. It's just going to take a while." And sure enough, it did.
Oh, wow.
We were able to adopt him. And
Praise God. That's great.
But the emotions that you go through and the same challenges. Now, if you fast forward probably 5 years from there, we had 3 children that were from the same family that lived with us for 3 years. We loved those children. And at the time, we had 7 children under 10.
You have one natural child.
Right.
You've adopted this little boy. What was
Correct.
his name?
Joe.
You adopted Joe.
Yeah.
Did you have more natural children before you adopted the rest of these? Because you're going to end up with 7 more kids.
Well, we ended up with 5. Our first foster child and our last foster child, we adopted both those 2.
Oh, wow.
And so my wife had 5 miscarriages in our marriage.
Yep.
And so there were times that she was pregnant, and then we had multiple children or a number of children or one child or whatever.
So you have this baby. Now you have 2 children. I'm just going to go
Correct.
from there, right? What made you said, "Hey, we want to foster another child"?
Well, then a third one came along. A little girl came along.
So you had a little girl. So now you got 3.
Yeah. So she's 11 years old, and we have a little baby, and we had our son who was about 2. Now, I want to back up a second if I can.
Sure, go ahead.
And this is for anybody out there that is considering fostering.
Yeah.
Okay. My parents said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Her parents said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They said, "Is it fair to your son? Because you have this other child. Is it going to be fair?" And they were all concerned and worried, probably for good reasons. There were good reasons that they were. We said, "No, this will be good for him, for our son." And then when we adopted the second one, it was good for all of them throughout this whole process. But that's a fear that all parents have. Yourself, when your son decided he was going to foster, I don't know if he had other children.
No, they didn't. This is
okay.
So, and they were concerned about it too, because you give all this love to this child, and at any moment, the child can be taken from you. I mean, you go in there having to know that and be aware of that,
right?
Right. And he was pretty strong. I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't say I don't know if I could foster, because I have 5 children. They all came naturally, but I mean, you're really putting your heart on the table there with this, because you love so much, and to have that child taken from you, it's hard, but it's also so noble and so beautiful to see that child reunited with families. I shared as I was bringing you on about a colleague of mine whose sister raised a child for 4 years. It was in the home. They wanted to adopt that child so bad, but they had to let it go and reunite with the parents. Right. So did you go through that as well? Yes. I'm assuming you went through 54 children. You had to probably do it a lot.
We did. Those 3 that I mentioned to you that were with us for 3 years, the siblings that were with us, they came from an abusive home. Well, all the homes are abusive. So of the 54 children, I would say 50 of them, at least 50 of them, were abused in some form. I would say the majority of them were sexually abused.
Wow.
Majority of them were, I would say almost 50 of the 54 were sexually abused.
That's sad.
And the abuse is everything from cigarette burns all over their bodies. And so it's kind of a sick society in some ways. We did not get into foster care to adopt.
Right.
We got in just to help these children. That was our intent, is just to help these children. And as my wife used to say, God just kind of helped lead us. He planted those seeds in our life when we were younger, with her finding the child, with me, with the big brother, that this was put in our heart that later on that he would call us to do some things with that.
Wow.
And so, but yes, we had those three. And so those three were with us for 3 years.
What kind of providence did you see? What kind of miracles in terms of blessings or the way that God had worked in some of those situations?
He revealed himself in so many different ways to us. I mean, just through the children in some. So my wife and I, our pastor at the time was talking about tithing for our parish.
Really? Yeah, wow.
He was talking to us about tithing. And we were giving about 0.5% of our income to the church. Okay. Now at that time, I thought I was being real generous.
Oh yeah.
Okay. This little girl came to our house. Her name was Jenny. She and her brother. They didn't have much. They didn't have much at all. And when she came to our house, her teeth were rotten. They were terrible. Yeah. And she had a tooth that fell out. And when the tooth fell out, well, let me back up just a second. I had a friend that talked to me about tithing. And our priest was talking to this, and our friend said, Brian, you need to try to work up from your 0.5% to 1%. And then after a year, maybe 2%, and then maybe another year, 3%. And he says, if it takes you a while, it takes a while, but try to get up to that 10%. And what a great friend that is that talks to you about something like that.
That's great.
And so, but at the same time, this Jenny comes to our house. She has her tooth fall out, and we tell her that we're going to put the tooth under her pillow, and the tooth fairy is going to come. And she goes, what's a tooth fairy? And so we said, well, the tooth fairy is this little fairy that comes at night and takes your tooth, and we'll put some money under your pillow. And she goes, So that night, the tooth fairy came and left $1 worth of change under her pillow.
Oh, wow.
So she woke up the next morning, and it was like Christmas. You would have thought
that's awesome.
It was the coolest thing in the world. She was so happy. So we went to Mass. It was a Sunday morning that we went to Mass, and we were at Mass, and we were probably about 10 rows back. And about 5 rows in front of us was a family. And in the family, they had 5 children. And at the time, I'm not sure what we had, but we had a number of children. And I knew he was unemployed, and the basket was being passed, and I saw him throw an envelope into that. And I thought, he's unemployed, throwing an envelope into
wow.
He's giving money. And then Jenny looked at me and she goes, what are they doing? And we said, well, they're taking money to help the church and to help the poor. And she goes, oh, okay. So the basket goes down, it comes back, it comes towards us. And as the basket gets between my wife and I, and Jenny's standing between my wife and I, she takes her hand, okay, and she pulls a dime out, and then she takes 90 cents and throws it in the basket and looks at me with the dime and says, I think I'll keep a little for myself. And my wife and I looked at each other because we were struggling with the whole concept of tithing, going from 0.5% up. We looked at each other and it was like a 2x4, whacked us across the head. So God uses in providence, he uses these little children to teach you things.
Hey, this episode of the Drew Mariani Show is on the Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free. It's updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers. So don't delay. Download the app today. Thanks for listening.